So I've heard it said that the two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day that you find out why. That day for me was in October of 1997, living in London, England, right across the street from Kensington Palace. How many of you have been to London? Yeah, so you know Kensington Palace. My wife and I were living there at the time. We were actually there, if you remember 97, August of 97, that was when Princess Diana was killed. So we were there to see all of that. So we were living in London, England. I was employed by a global consulting firm, living the life of an expat, also feeling just a little bit down and out, not knowing what life had in store for me, but knowing that there was something that was being called forth in me. You can kind of feel that, right? The sense that there's something that you're wanting, needing, thinking of doing, but not necessarily having a way of touching into that. So this one October night, I'm laying in bed. Now, one of the things I love to do laying in bed, of course, my wife and love of my life for 28 years next to me is we're sort of both serial or parallel readers, and I almost always have a book of poetry. The book of poetry that night was an anthology by Robert Frost, and there's a particular poem in this book. If it's an anthology, you can imagine it's got most of his poems. This particular poem was called Two Tramps in Mud Time. And at the end of this poem is a stanza that the first time I read it, the first time I read the words were like seared completely into my being. And I knew without a doubt, not what I was going to go do, but why. But yield who will to their separation. But yield who will to their separation. My object in living is to unite my vocation, what I get paid for, my vocation with my avocation, what I love to do. But yield who will to their separation. My object in living is to unite my vocation and my avocation. As my two eyes make one in sight, only where love and need are one, is the deed ever really done for heaven's and the future's sake.
Thanks. Those lines of poetry, which are to me scripture, and their relationship to the fierce urgency of now is what I'd like to share with you today. But over the last year, I've had the deep joy to work personally with all three of our guest speakers from last night as part of their participation in Stegan's Advanced Academy. And over the past several years, I've worked with many of the guest speakers from this morning. And considering this, what I really want to do here is just to celebrate and give thanks for the value and the significance that they've already shared with us. And I'd like to start with the last lines of that poem. Is the deed ever really done for heaven and the future's sakes? The deed that can be done is your life and how you choose to live it. For that deed to be done well is for you to live devotionally in the service to the fierce urgency of now. If we live in this way, then our lives become a nourishing satisfaction on behalf of heaven and the future. In the same way that when you eat something, genuinely nourishing and deeply satisfying, it hits the sweet spot of your hunger. Here, our lives hit the sweet spot of heaven and the future's hunger, becoming their nourishing satisfaction, becoming unto them a blessing. If we begin to live in this way, you'll discover that the fierce urgency of now is very demanding. It demands we live our lives in a devotional service that is only accomplished through the disciplines of savoring and saving. And as Haley brought our attention to yesterday, E.B. White said, I wake up every morning torn between the desire to enjoy life and to improve it, to savor it and to save it. And she reminded us that saving life means taking care of the needs of the world, solving the fierce and urgent problems facing us today. But savoring life means appreciating, sensitively and robustly celebrating the miracle that your life is. And although the fierce demand of life is not just about saving, but also equally and perhaps more importantly about savoring, the demand to save, to serve the needs of the world, and to make things better tends to be what captures our attention and what we more eagerly pursue. We can even be skeptical, wondering if the demand to savor is frivolous or fanciful in the face of such urgent and desperate need. But Haley also reminded us that E.B. White said, if you forget to savor the world, there will be no reason to save it. If life wasn't worth savoring, it wouldn't be worth saving. It's only because we know that life is valuable and precious that we want to benefit it, that we want to be of help. But it's also because life is exquisite and inconsolably precious that it demands to be savored. Your life is a gift. It is an exquisite and precious miracle. And the only response in the face of that miracle, the only way to serve it well, is through savoring it and saving it. Haley also reminded us that, as E.B. White says, somehow savoring must come first. And here E.B. White perfectly agrees with what Andy said. Andy said beautifully and powerfully, if you want to shake the world to its core, first you must have been shaken to your core by the world. As we savor life, we allow the world to shake us to our core. As we save life, the world allows us to shake it to its core. And yet somehow, savoring must come first. So I want to share a few stories that illustrate this dynamic of saving and savoring as the core of serving life well. And I'd like to start with the story of Moses and the burning bush. This is a story about how to hear the voice of God. Sounds pretty cool, right? Please remember that hearing the voice of God is for all of us. It's for every one of us, now and always, without exception. Hearing the voice of God is your birthright if you will only claim it. It is the responsibility that you are confronted with and that you contend with as you face and navigate life's fierce urgency. This story is fairly simple and straightforward. Moses is passing by, not the burning bush. The burning bush is a small, safe, and well-contained brush fire. Just a small, safe, and well-contained brush fire that happens to also be alight with a flame that does not consume its wood. And only when he recognizes this, appreciates it, takes interest, and draws near does he hear the voice of God speak to him. So, the central question in this story, I'll pause and say that the story comes to me from Father Thomas Keating, who passed away a few months ago this year. And it comes to him from Rabbi Lawrence Kushner, and it comes to him from the rabbis of antiquity, and it comes to them from the source of all biblical wisdom. So the core question in this story that unlocks the instruction about how to hear the voice of God is this: what allows Moses to recognize and appreciate the unique nature of the flame, that it does not consume the wood, and so take interest and draw near? It's not just the burning bush, and it's not just hearing the voice of God. When all he sees is a burning bush, he doesn't take interest and draw near. And it's not until after he takes interest and draws near that he hears the voice of God. So what is it? The answer that comes from biblical wisdom is that what allows Moses to recognize the unique nature of the flame is the quality of his attention. It is his ability to simply and beautifully pay attention to and be present with his everyday life, appreciatively savoring it as the exquisite and inconsolably precious miracle that it is. And it's this same ability, the ability to beautifully pay attention to be present with, and to appreciatively savor life, that allows him to hear the voice of God that is, after all, always and forevermore speaking, although not always listened to and not always heard. So for Moses, the way that he is present with and attends to his life is with immense care, curiosity, and concern. And these are resources available to every one of us now and always, in every moment. There's always a choice to engage or to lean in, to pay attention with a little bit more care, with a little bit more curiosity, or with a little bit more concern. And if we did, we might just hear the voice of God. The way that Moses pays attention to his life is awake to, appreciative with, and devotionally in the service of the miracle that it is. And it's because of his deep capacity to savor life that God chooses him to save it, leading his people to freedom and fulfillment. And in a sense, it's just as simple as that. If any of us are interested in hearing the voice of God, all we have to do is learn to pay attention beautifully, to be exquisitely present with our everyday life. Whatever you happen to be engaged with right now, from the bottom of your heart. That it's our ability to be awake to and to appreciatively savor the miracle at the heart of your ordinary, common, mundane, everyday life. To be awake to and to appreciatively savor the miracle at the heart of your ordinary, everyday life. And didn't Christ say, even as you do unto the least of these, so you do unto me? The miracle at the heart of your ordinary, everyday life. This is what allows us to hear the voice of God speaking to us from without, from within, through the heart of that very same miracle. And so this story shows us that our capacity, the quality with which we attend to and are present with and savor life, is the capacity that we have to hear the voice of God, and that we desperately need to hear the voice of God, because it's the source of the legitimate guidance that we need to robustly and skillfully take care of and serve the life we're living. This dynamic of savoring and saving is also at play in the story of Dr. King. His I Have a Dream speech, the role Mahalia Jackson plays in the world receiving that speech, and the way that we almost missed it entirely. So by the time that the March on Washington rolls around, King is already a national influence politically. And yet, I'm told, many Americans had never seen him or heard from him directly. The organizers of the event had planned for maybe 100,000 people to be in attendance, and yet over 250,000 people showed up, far exceeding what anyone even knew how to hope for. This event was to be King's grand introduction to our nation. Everyone who was gathered there had a palpable sense of the historical significance of that day. And Dr. King prepared a speech, but it wasn't his I Have a Dream speech, because his closest advisors, his most trusted friends, the aides that he trusted the most, had all cautioned him and warned him, after all, that his I Have a Dream speech was trite. It was ineffectual, and it would fail to move or touch anyone's heart. King believed them. He trusted them. He relied on their advice. And so when he took the podium, he gave us his prepared speech, but not his dream. And as he wound to the end of that speech, we're told that pretty much everybody gathered there, all of his friends, and even King himself could tell that although his speech was good, he was Dr. King, they were all good, it wasn't great. The speech wasn't great. It had failed to hit the sweet spot, to be nourishing satisfaction in the face of the fierce and urgent hunger before him. And as he wrapped up that speech, from behind him, loudly, Mahalia Jackson spoke out, "Martin, tell them your dream." But he didn't stop. He just continued to give his speech. And she only waited a few moments. And she interrupted again, even louder, "Martin, tell them your dream." And that time he paused. He took a deep breath. He set aside his prepared speech, and he gave us his dream. Because of her ability to savor life, that day Mahalia Jackson could save it. Like Moses, she had heard the voice of God and she had responded. Like Moses, she herself had become a burning bush through which the voice of God called out to those of us who have the capacity to listen and so to hear. And because of Dr. King's ability to save her life, that day he was able to save it, sharing with us his dream. And then he too, like her and like Moses, became a burning bush, calling out with the voice of God to us, calling out to you who have the capacity to listen and so to hear. The message is clear. Tell them your dream. Tell us your dream. Share your dream with us. Live your dream. Set aside your prepared speech. The world doesn't need your prepared speech, but it does need your dream. And every person here has a unique dream that the world is holding its breath, waiting for you to offer. Tell them your dream. Tell us your dream.